Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. Can I ask everyone to note the fire safety instruction? There are no planned fire drills tonight. If, however, the alarm goes off, please use the fire exit through the main doors of the hall or the fire exit in the storeroom adjacent to the stage, which is where I'm pointing. The fire assembly point is in the island in the front of the main entrance to the building. Please do not delay the evacuation or collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. I also remind you, please switch off your mobile phones or switch them to silent. Please note the meeting will be live streamed where the proceedings are capable of repeated viewing. So please ensure your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. Once finished speaking, can you please switch off the microphone to avoid feedback noise? If you're seated in the public air of the chamber, it's likely your image will be captured by the recording cameras and as a result, your image being part of the broadcast. If members are for any reason not present for the whole debate on an item, you will not be allowed to vote on that item. May I remind members to declare any interests and the nature of the interests at the beginning of an agenda item, and that on declaring a pecuniary interest, you're required to leave the room when that item of business is considered. So we move on to item 1, which is apologies for absence and substitutes. We have received apologies for the absence of Councillor Stuart Wilson, and Councillor Michael Hoy will be substituting. Welcome. And Councillor Sarah Jane Page has also given apologies, and Councillor Linden is substituting. Welcome. Are there any other apologies for absence?
Councillor Richard Lambourne did send his apologies. I did see the email, so I think that might have been too late to get to you, that's all.
That's all right. Yes, thank you. Item 2 is non-members attending. We've got Councillor Loreen Shaw and Councillor James Newport. Thank you. All right, item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of July 2024. Are the minutes agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. They're agreed. Item 4 is to receive declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Thank you. Item 5 is public questions on notice. Members, we've received one public question on notice from Ms. Jill Waite. I will now invite Ms. Waite to speak, please, to read out her question.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. This is my question. I also understand I have a supplementary question if allowed by the Chair. The Ernst & Young audit report on the asset delivery programme identified a significant weakness in governance of the Council for the municipal year 2022-2023. Specifically, they confirmed the failure to hold a public consultation in advance of the procurement of a partner ultimately resulted in additional spend and financial loss to the Council. And the Council failed to provide evidence to the external auditor that due diligence was completed when paying the £622,000 of abortive costs to remove the Mill Arts and Events Centre from the asset delivery programme. Chairman, please can you reassure residents that the Council under the new administration will implement all recommendations from the external auditor? Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Thank you for your question, Jill. You are correct in your statement that the Council's external auditor, Ernst & Young, has concluded in their interim value for money report that there was a significant governance weakness in 22-23. It's worth pointing out that as part of her value for money report, Ms. Hanson has concluded that there were no significant weaknesses in financial sustainability or economy, efficiency and effectiveness in either 2021-22 and 2022-23. Following her investigations into the original decision to embark upon the asset delivery plan, and partner with GB Partnerships as part of the 2021-22 value for money checks, and bearing in mind the independent investigation this committee commissioned in September 2023, she has concluded that there was no significant weakness in governance for the year 2021-22. Finally, as part of her 2022-23 value for money checks, Ms. Hanson states she was satisfied that members were provided with all relevant information before they made their decision to remove the mill hall from the asset delivery programme. However, there have been governance weaknesses identified in 2022-23, which has led to the two recommendations in the report. These relate to two matters. Number one is that appropriate due diligence is undertaken on any compensation payments and that evidence of such process is retained. Item 2 was that the recommendations from the review of the contract awarded to GB Partnerships reported in October 2023 and they have been implemented. As chair of this committee, I can assure Ms. Waite that I fully support these recommendations. Furthermore, this committee is still expecting the publication of the exempt report by the independent consultants into the original decision to award the Asset Development Programme Partnership contract to GB Partnerships. The Audit Committee of 27th of September 2023 considered and approved all recommendations from that report. The delay in publication is a result of ongoing commercial considerations, and as soon as they are resolved, the report will be published. However, I can state publicly is that the weaknesses identified are being or have been addressed, and these are specifically include the retention of relevant documents to ensure any retrospective review of decisions is fully informed. The second point is appropriate due diligence of compensation payments is carried out and recorded. And the third point is that the council's contract procedure rules and financial regulations are to be updated. And the fourth point is and an assessment of the viability of the asset development programme and the partnership arrangements to deliver it. I've shared this response with the leader of the council, who's fully supportive of everything I've said. In fact, he's sitting here tonight. Thank you. That's the answer. Thank you. And we can have a written version as well.
May I have a follow-up to that, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Chairman, the opposite of diligence is negligence. Breakdown of the £622,000 of abortive costs is in the public domain. I've got a copy of it, and it's allowed. The Assistant Director for Assets and Commercial at the time, Mr. Harwood White, he confirmed, and I quote, following the executive decision to remove the mill site from the asset delivery programme, the council is now liable to pay costs totalling £43,915. That was it. However, the council then authorised an additional payment of £578,000 despite the absence of any obligation or requirement to do so. £578,000, sir. That's taxpayers' money. It could have been better spent on council services such as improving our children's play areas or upgrading the rubbish bins in our open spaces, but it wasn't. Chair, here's my question. Will the administration investigate whether any person, officer or elected member is personally culpable or professionally negligent for the failures identified by the external auditor? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jill. Sorry, Chair. I probably can refer that to the officers to answer.
I think in terms of the development matter which can respond to this evening.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll have a go. In terms of investigating how the 622,000 was arrived at, I think is fundamentally your question, and what process was followed to get to that figure. Sorry, I'll bring the microphone a little bit closer. Sorry. I think there's a couple of things I'll say about that. One is that there hasn't been a specific investigation into that, but I would say that there's been an external auditor, the partner of whom is sitting here tonight, having carried out a value for money assessment of the year in question and made specific recommendations in relation to the decision to remove Mill Hall from the ADP, which led to the £622,000 compensation. That's, I think, as close as we're going to get to it tonight. And I would just take the liberty of asking Debbie Hanson, she's got her 2 items coming and the value for money report is coming as well, whether or not she has any comment about that particular investigation into that question.
Thank you. I think it's worth making a couple of points. So in relation to our value for money work that we're bringing here today, as the Chair has already noted in his introduction in response to your question, that covered the financial year 21-22. So that's the 1st of April 21 to the end of March 22, and then the subsequent year. What it doesn't cover is 2021, which was the period within which the public consultation occurred and the decision to remove the hall from the ADP. The reason it doesn't cover that is that because that's a closed year of account. We've finished our audits in relation to those years and issued our certificate, and therefore there's no remit to go back and kind of revisit that per se. We have, however, obviously reported on that and taken it into account in terms of the consequential impacts of that decision. We've also looked at the reports that went to members, of which there were 2 key dates, which I have got in the report, and I'm trying to remember the exact dates of them. So there was 2 that was the key ones to making the decision. We've commented in our report that I think the figures could have been made clearer in those 2 reports, and you do need to take the 2 reports together to get the full picture of the impact of the decision. However, having looked at those, we were comfortable that actually those full costs, the 622,000, were reported to members before they made the decision to remove that asset from the programme. It could have been clearer, was our view, but it is there and it has been reported to members to make that decision. It's not the auditor's responsibility and it's not within our powers to basically form a view on any council's decisions. Our kind of role is to look at process and has that been followed appropriately. It's not for us to replace our view on what the decision should be with the council's own. Councillors are elected members and that's their responsibility to make those decisions on behalf of the electorate of the area. I don't know if that helps to provide any context to our findings.
Well, that's where we're at the moment. But what we do know is, of course, once all this is resolved, there will be a full publication of the internal audit. Yeah, thank you. Members, before we proceed to debate the main items of business tonight, I'd like to welcome Ms. Debbie Hanson from Ernst & Young attending tonight's meeting. Welcome, you've already been introduced, this is good. And we can move on to item 6, which is the interim value for money opinion. Members now consider the report of Ernst & Young, the authority's external auditors, presenting the interim value for money opinion. And you may wish to invite Ms. Hanson to add any further comments to the report. If members have questions on this item, members should note that at the end of this, it's to note only this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as you've noted, this is an interim report covering 2 financial years. The reason it's interim is that because we will find... Sorry, I'll move my mic. Okay, is that any better? Yeah. No. Okay, I will keep it very close, sorry. So this is an interim report covering 2 years. The reason it's interim is because we will issue our final value for money commentary as part of our auditor's annual report, which we will be issuing alongside our audit opinions on 21-22 and 22-23. And the aim is that we'll be issuing those before the backstop dates, which are the dates that we're expecting to be set to conclude those audits by ministers, and that is the middle of December. So we're actually looking to conclude all that work, if we can, by the end of November, to issue that final report. That doesn't mean to say we've got additional work that we need to do. but we do need to remain alert to anything that comes to our attention between now and that date when we issue our final auditor's annual report and audit certificate, which will conclude the audit. So I think we've probably covered quite a lot of the content of the report already in item 5, but I think I just wanted to reiterate that in terms of financial sustainability, we are comfortable that the council has adequate arrangements for financial sustainability. There's a medium-term financial strategy, which is regularly updated. There's a robust process for setting and monitoring the budget. The council sets a minimum level for general fund balances of around 10% of net expenditure. And in both 21-22 and 22-23, that general fund balance was above that minimum level. In addition to that, the council does have earmarked reserves, which sit around 13 and 14 million in those 2 years. The medium-term financial strategy in February 23 does project some reductions in that general fund balance and also earmarked reserves, but that was based on predictions at that time and is likely to change as the MTFS continues to be updated on an ongoing basis. In relation to value for money arrangements, so arrangements for economy, efficiency and effectiveness, again, we are satisfied that the council has adequate arrangements in place. As we've already discussed, the area where we do have concerns is in relation to the governance arrangements in 22-23, around the lack of documented evidence to support the due diligence over the payment of £622,000 to GB partnerships. We also noted that there was a health check undertaken on the ADP, which also recommended that the council ensured it retained corporate knowledge about the ADP. I think that's something that hasn't happened. So, for example, we were trying to find a copy of a risk register that should have been in place for the ADP. It wasn't possible to provide that. And there was clearly lack of knowledge that disappeared when some of the officers involved at that time are no longer with the council. So that's definitely an area that arrangements need to be strengthened in to ensure that key information is not reliant on individuals, but is instilled in council processes and documented clearly so that the organisation can access that information and it isn't held with individuals. There was also, as we referred to, the independent investigation into the appointment of GB partnerships initially, and that had similar issues in terms of not being able to access documentation in a number of areas. So that's a really key theme, I think, which runs through all of those reports the council needs to clearly strengthen. For that reason, we will be modifying our audit report for 22-23 to report that significant weakness in governance. But as I said, we haven't identified a weakness in 21-22. I think I've already made the points about the fact that some of the reports could have been clearer, but ultimately, from the reports that we've seen, we are satisfied that members did have access to the full information about the cost implications of decisions that were made when they made those decisions. I think it's worth noting that there are other costs associated with the process as well. It's not just the £622,000, it's a loss of a capital receipt, which is noted in our report, as well as like ongoing capital spend costs on the asset, although those would probably have to be incurred anyway. So those are probably the main things I wanted to draw out in relation to the value for money commentary. As I've said, we will be alert to anything else that comes to our attention between now and the time we fully conclude our audit, but we are not looking to undertake any additional work unless something comes to our attention. Before moving on to the plan, which is the next item, I'll pause in case there's any questions on that report.
Have any members got any questions? Councillor Hoy.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. The report itself is rather shocking to get a severe weakness to be identified in our governance. It seems as though the impression I'm getting is you don't seem to think it was, you think it's serious, but it could have been worse. I don't know. It's coming across like that. How our governance procedures failed, but it appears from the report you're saying that we as members were given the figures and therefore we made the decision with the figures in front of us. I read a lot more into it than that, though. From the report, was it just the due diligence was the issue that you couldn't find it? Was it missing on purpose? Do you know why we couldn't find this information? I find it really worrying that for such a major part of our programme that we just did not have any information at all about it, and that seems to be the case. I've got information of how the breakdown of the 622,000 is made up. Do you have that information or not? I couldn't quite work out from this if you did or didn't. It just says that we as members were told. So I was told as a member, but I wasn't aware that there was no due diligence, or possibly was. I did make representation saying I was not happy, and I certainly didn't know why Fusion were removed from the contract at the time, because there were and forgiven a lot of repair works they would have normally undertaken. So when you say members, are you saying members of the council, or are you saying members of the administration at the time were given the full picture? I know it's a very general question, but can you work with that? Thank you.
I can, thank you. So we have seen evidence of the £622,000 figure being reported to members before they made the decision to remove the asset from the programme, from the ADP. When we talk about due diligence, that figure should have been built up from an open book accounting process. So that was therefore to be derived from obviously validating the abortive costs of GB partnership. What we couldn't find evidence of was that process having been gone through. So we could see that there was a figure reported, and that was what was paid to GB partnerships. What we couldn't see was the council's challenge and due diligence to validate that that was an appropriate value to pay. And that is the significant weakness. We're not saying it didn't happen, but if nobody can prove to us that it did, then as an auditor, we have to say, we can't say that happened because nobody can show to us that actually went through as a process.
I'm still struggling a little bit. So is this a failure at the point of full council meeting or a failure during the executive? Obviously, we no longer have an executive system, so that wouldn't apply at the moment. I'm just conscious I don't want the same mistake happening again. And really, I am trying to find out whether this information you think was deliberately lost, accidentally lost, or just lost in the chaos of what was going on at the time.
Councillor Hoy, I think Mr. Willis might be able to assist. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this time predates a lot of us, but I can say with a reasonable degree of confidence that there wasn't anything underhand or secretive or being withheld. I know me and my colleagues, a lot of them in this room as well, searched high and low, electronically and in cupboards, for documentation that Debbie rightly asked for to support her audit. We found an awful lot of information, but not everything. And some of the things that we weren't able to find, she's made reference to in her report. I think the issue, my understanding around the 622,000 isn't necessarily how it was broken down. It was more, what did we get for that, or what did GB partnerships truly incur to justify that sort of claim? And that's what was at the heart of the due diligence, that there wasn't sufficient evidence produced to show that took place, that due diligence. I couldn't find that, and I wasn't able to supply that to Debbie. As to who's responsible for that, I think that's a really tricky one, whether it's officers or members is I think the essence of what you're saying, Councillor Hoy. But I think members were entitled to a greater level of information and breakdowns of information, supplementary information, advice and guidance than they received in making that decision, even though ultimately, as the report says, they made the decision in the full knowledge of the financial consequences of that decision. And the rest is politics, really.
So,
thank you, Jim.
Can I just get this straight in my head then? You know the figures and how they've arrived at the 622,000. I thought it's 623,918 according to the information I've got. We know how that's been arrived at, but we can't see that the due diligence in checking those figures has been done. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. There were similar activities like this taking place in councils all the time when you're extricating yourself from a partnership or a component of a partnership, and there were costs to be incurred on both sides. The council would have incurred abortive costs as well, which it had to swallow. But given that it was the council's decision, then our partner would justifiably come to the table and say they wanted to be compensated for that. Sometimes those costs that they go to that make up the compensation are reflective of costs they've genuinely incurred that were abortive because they incurred them in good faith, but then and spent the money on consultants or staffing costs or whatever it might be, but then it wasn't needed because the council changed their mind. Sometimes there are costs which have value to the council. For example, planning permission, if that had been a factor, then that would have had a value. And those are the sort of things when somebody does due diligence, they want to test out. So they'd want to say, okay, what's the value of that planning permission? Does it equate to the sort of element of the compensation? What were the amounts paid to consultants? What was the level of staffing costs incurred in relation to which particular aspects of the work that turned out to be abortive? Those are the sort of forensic questions that you would normally expect to be asked during a period of due diligence. And if they did take place during this process, we can't find evidence to support them.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. I should point out one of the work streams of this committee is actually the tightening up of risk assessments and the nailing down of how we retain documents and the processes of it. So this cannot happen again. And we pay particular attention to that because that is a learning curve from this, because councillors are, and as a councillor did point out at one of these meetings, lay people, and they are guided by experts. And of course, if something is lacking in that area, you may think you know everything, but in fact, the detail inside is not there or accessible or is lost. So we can't have the learning from this lost and the decision-making lost, because that can be expensive. So basically, that's one of the big objectives of governance and audit from this committee, moving on into this year. And once everything is in the open, when the commercial discussions are over, we can then look back on the year on a review of what we've done, and overview and scrutiny can look at what we're doing as well, because there'll be like a bit of what they call it, critical friendship in that area. That's where we're at. I mean, what has happened has happened. And it's unfortunate, really, the way it has happened, but then we're moving on. So anyway, thank you, Tim. If there's no other questions on this section, oh, sorry, Councillor Wootton.
Thank you, Chairman. I think your last point was very appropriate. I don't think that there can be a conclusion, because documentation, and frankly, I find it absolutely appalling that the audit trail of documentation isn't available for one reason or another, and that is an audit function, and totally support. But I don't think the natural conclusion from that is that due diligence wasn't done. I just want to sort of, if we're being led down that route, then I strongly refute that point. But it is a major concern. I mean, personally, I welcome this report. Without going through it forensically, there are many, many questions that I could ask that concern me, because at the time I was very closely associated with the programme. I think it's a bit disingenuous to have such a focus on the Mill Hall alone, when actually the Mill Hall was one of 6 buildings. And I'm pleased that Ernst Young referred to the fact of the missed opportunity of a £1.5 million return, capital return. So you have to get some balance in all of this. So I appreciate that. But the audit function, frankly, appalls me that there is missing documentation, and that is the learning from this. But my point, Chairman, is that I would actually like, and came from the questioner earlier on, I would actually like to see the 2 recommendations which are at the bottom of page 12. I would like to see those incorporated within this report rather than the report. I always find a report which says we'll note it a rather weak recommendation, because there's 2 very specific recommendations there. But in other respects, it's interesting looking back, the number of times that I was told that we could not refer to consultation, it had to be engagement. the number of times that I was told that we had independent checks through the LGA, other audit processes through the whole of the ADP program. So it is really quite concerning, albeit with the benefit of hindsight, that some of these points come out now, which are fairly fundamental. But as I say, I actually welcome this report because it brings out a number of points that actually I raised at the time, felt that, well, am I getting the absolutely, I believe answers were given to me in sincerity, but whether or not they had been forensically analysed, I don't know. And the suggestion here is perhaps they weren't. But certainly I would like to see those recommendations, if other members agree, included within the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wootton. Mr. Willis just had a word. Maybe we can incorporate those recommendations in the full covering report, and we can go with that. Yeah, thank you.
Chair, if I might just add, when we issue our auditor's annual report, we will actually have a recommendation section at the end as well, which will have a full management response. So because this is an interim report, we haven't actually put the management response in at the moment, so we will ensure that that is tied up when we do the final reporting as well.
Right, thank you, members. If there are no more questions in that section, we can move on to item 7, which is now consider the report of Ernst & Young via the Interim Director of Resources presenting the 2023-24 audit plan. And you may wish to invite Ms. Hanson to add any further comments to the report. So if members have questions on this item, they're welcome. And at the end, members should note that the report is for noting. All right. Ms. Hanson, have you got anything to say to introduce it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say a few words. I'm actually presenting this on behalf of my colleague, Elizabeth Jackson, who is the partner taking over the audit from 23-24 from myself. I'm very pleased to note that it's actually a fairly standard audit plan, which was quite nice to bring. And those of you members of the committee that have been on the committee previously will probably recognise the risks in here. So the purpose of the plan is to bring to the attention of the committee the key risks that we've identified as part of our audit planning process, the responses we plan to, and the work we plan to undertake to address those risks, and also the planned timeframe for the audit. So the risks we've got on there are in the overview section, which are on page 10 electronically. They're fairly standard risks for a district council of your size. So we've got a normal risk of misstatement due to fraud or error, and that's as a result of potential management override of controls. And under auditing standards, we're required to reflect that risk in every audit plan. So you'll see that in a corporate entity or a public sector entity. We then decide whether there's any specific areas that are maybe more risk. The first of those we identify as the inappropriate capitalisation of revenue spend. And again, we would identify that as a fraud risk in any entity that had a significant capital programme. And that's because by moving expenditure from capital to revenue, from revenue to capital, I'll get that right way around, it avoids it impacting on council tax, and it means you can finance in it a different way. So it gets it out of the council tax sort of spending area. So again, we identify that in all of our clients. Then you move on to inherent risks. So these are not sort of specific high risk areas, and they're not areas of fraud, but because the council does have a material property, plant and equipment base, we identify that as a higher inherent risk. That's because it's a very large balance on the council's balance sheet, and asset valuations are judgmental, requiring input from specialists, and therefore there's more judgment and estimate within that. And then similarly, the pension liability valuation, again, is a very, very large figure on the balance sheet, again, requires input from actuaries to derive that, and will be based on assumptions and judgments. So again, we identify that area as an area of higher inherent risk. We've then just set the materiality levels. So we audit to a materiality of £635,000. We then set a slightly lower level at which we actually undertake our testing, and we do that at £476,000, which is 75% of the overall materiality, and that's the highest level we can set, and that reflects the fact that the council's accounts in previous years have been good quality with relatively few errors, and so we set that at a higher level. No significant changes in the audit strategy from previous years. The audit will be impacted by the fact that the accounts will be disclaimed for 22-23. and that will mean that it will take some years for the assurance to be built up. Probably that won't happen until 25, 26, but we will start to do that, and that's the same position that hundreds of local authorities will be in terms of the impact of the backstops and local audit resets. But we are looking not to rebuild that assurance in 23, 24, to start to build that in 24, 25. And the reason for that is so that we can hit the backstop date, which has been set for that audit, which is actually not very long off. It's in February. So that's not a huge amount of time to kind of get through all the audit. But the audit has started, planning has been completed, and the actual substantive year-end work has already commenced as well. Very happy to take any questions or comments. As I said, Liz will come along and present the audit results report to you at the point that the audit is concluded.
Thank you, Debbie. Have members got any questions? Councillor Hoy.
Thank you. Just because I thought there ought to be a question at least. Sorry, I'm substituting on this audit committee, so I may be asking a question based on something I'm not sure about. So if I can clear that up first. When were the last set of accounts audited and signed off?
I can't remember the exact date, but the last set of accounts were 2021.
21, right.
Yeah.
So is this what you're referring to? Because obviously, if you're doing 23, 24, you won't know what if the opening balances are correct or not. So that's what you're referring to about. You may have to leave it until they are signed off before you can confirm it, or will you be doing work on the opening balances to confirm those?
Okay, so you are correct in that we won't have assurance over the opening balances or comparative figures in the 23-24 accounts, and therefore that will result in a modification to our audit opinion in 23-24. What we will then need to do is to rebuild that assurance to build up that assurance over a period of, normally it takes 3 years for any modified opinion. So we won't do all of that extra work in 23-24, but we will build in extra audit procedures over the subsequent years to start to rebuild that position so that we can give assurances. For some areas, that's easier than others. So, for example, for property valuations, if you have a full revaluation at March 24, we can look at that, and that gives us full assurance over the March 24 balance. For reserves, that might be more complicated because that flows through from your income and expenditure account. So that we're building up at the moment a detailed strategy to see how we build up that assurance, and we're working very closely with regulators and with the FIC in terms of what approaches we should be adopting to do that. We have experience of this from corporate audits on occasion, so we do have a process for that, but obviously local government accounts are different than corporate accounts, and so there's different balances that we need to build that assurance up for. But it can't be done in 1 year is the answer. It will always take a number of years to flow through.
Okay, thank you. But that shouldn't be a reflection on this council. It's just a reflection on the process that's happened to a lot of councils, I understand.
Correct. This is part, I mean, the plan does refer to the sort of reset and recovery of the local audit system. And so that's what this is part of. And as I said, there will be hundreds of councils that are in exactly the same position as yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. No, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. Otherwise, I'm sure you're more than welcome to excuse yourself for the rest of the meeting. And thank you
very much, Chair.
for that, for your input. Thank you. Yeah, members, this report is for noting. Is it noted? Right, thank you. Okay. So we now move on to item 8, which is the audit progress report for 2024-25. We now consider the report of the Audit and Counter Fraud Manager providing an update on the work of the internal audit team in terms of the progress made against the audit plan for 2024-25 and the action taken by service departments in implementing audit recommendations. Mr. Porter, do you have anything to add to the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. All I would like to add is, since producing the table at Appendix 2, 8.17 of the agenda pack on live audit recommendations, we've received further updates from managers in terms of live recommendations. So all the recommendations that are live have had notes provided to me in terms of their current position. So just to give you a quick update, we now have a latest note position in relation to audit recommendations. There's been a big push by senior management in terms of providing that information to myself. So I'd like to give assurances to members that, yeah, we've had updates in relation to audit recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. And any questions, members? Councillor Mrs. Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Mike Porter for that update. That was indeed my question I was going to ask, because 29% being overdue is quite unacceptable, I think, in any business. So my question now is, and it's been what was going to be my supplementary question, is what action can the senior officers take to make sure we're not in this position again? Because all we're doing is wasting auditors' time, and which costs us money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll take part of that and then pass over to Tim. But the audit recommendations will feature on the agenda for a directorate meeting, so they will be discussed by directors in terms of recommendations. Recommendations will also feature on SLT meetings. So the state of play in regards to audit recommendations will now feature on a number of meetings, senior management meetings, so they can provide updates and get assurances from their officers that audit recommendations are being updated and are being notified of the progress made. So senior management will discuss the state of play on a number of various meetings going forward.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike, for that update. So can I just ask what the consequences will be if things run over again, rather than a discussion at a senior level meeting? Thank you.
I think Mr. Willis can come back on that. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. I can't actually say what punishment will be inflicted on relevant managers, but what I can try and do is give a bit more of an assurance to Councillor Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, around the seriousness with which we've taken this issue, which is, as Mike Porter said, every completed draft report on an audit assignment is going to be sent to corporate leadership team for consideration at its next meeting, in case there's anything that the relevant director who's going to be at CLT needs to be impressed upon by their colleagues, including the chief executive, that it's important if there's a limited assurance, for example, or a very high level action recommendation. In addition to that, we have statutory officer meetings on a monthly basis, which is the head of paid service, section 151 officer and monitoring officer. Paul is the monitoring officer. And we meet on a monthly basis, and we've requested from Mike every month an update to say how we're doing against the current year's audit plan, primarily, and if there's any hitches that we can help unblock. I'd also say that the work that we've had carried out recently, with the help of some of my colleagues, and in liaison with Mike, to actually try and update all the actions from the recommendations. We have done a lot. I still think there's a bit more we can do, which is, in some cases, I think we could probably rationalise the recommendations a bit more than they are currently presented. Not to try and hide not delivering on things, but just sometimes if you've done 75% of one and it's just the 25% that's not done, then it's not done. We just need to find a better way to capture that information, I think. And sometimes Mike will come around and do another audit because it's like 3 years have gone by and the actions still haven't been done. Well, there's no point in keeping the 3-year-old actions. We just update it for the latest actions. So there's a few things we can do just to rationalise the list. But all of that information is going to come back on a one-off basis to corporate leadership team. I think it's later this month we've committed to, Paul, for this council. All that comprehensive list in Appendix 2 of all the outstanding recommendations. At CLT, we're going to go through that whole list and hold the directors to account, who are going to be around the table to say, if you've put in another revised date, because sometimes there's been a number of revised dates for delivering the actions, are you going to hit that one? Because it's not just audit committee that are looking at this and holding you to account. Your colleagues are too around this table. So we will be testing whether or not you can deliver that. If you can't make it realistic, if there's genuine reasons why you can't, we would much rather have a longer realistic date than a date that's just a hope and then we fail to achieve it again.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Yes,
Thank you. My last comment, Mr. Willis, thank you very much for that full assurance. I look forward to the next report from Mike Porter having no outstanding dates. Otherwise, I shall come back and find you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Councillor Hoy.
Thank you. I'm not quite so reassured. We're just looking through the report, page 8.17. We have RDC 04202, 2.01, Vehicle Fleet Management 2022-23, status overdue. Recommendation is for a formal written strategy to be established that defines the council's approach to fleet management. Then goes on a bit more detail, I won't read it all. Priority significant. Progress bar 25%. Due date 30th of November 2023. Original due date 30th of June 2023. Latest note 3rd of January 24. And then latest note date 8th of January 2024. The latest note says, full list of vehicles with a condition and estimated replacement date being pulled together considering electric alternatives and timing of EVs as to whether replacement dates are brought forward. The latest note seems to be preempting a strategy, surely. And I know for a fact that this has been agreed in the last Environment Committee. So I'm very worried that we're agreeing to purchase things without a strategy which is supposed to be in place and which is supposed to be a significant item. So I don't think I can be reassured, but we've made that decision now on electric vehicles and fleet replacement, but we still don't have a strategy. So we've done it without a strategy, and that really does concern me. Have you any comments on that?
Yeah, I've received a latest update from Marcus to say that a strategy has now been produced and considered by members. That's the latest note he provided me with a couple of weeks ago. So as far as I'm aware, a strategy has been produced and agreed by members, as far as I'm aware. So I had definitely had an update in the last couple of weeks. That's the latest note I've been given. I mean, that's produced that in...
Yeah, I understand that. So can you come back to the committee and confirm that the strategy was in place before the new electric vehicles were ordered and the new fleet was ordered? I just want to make sure it was done in time. If that was the case, that's absolutely great. And I understand the report is at a point in time.
So,
sorry,
do you want to
yes,
come back
I will
on
do
that?
that. Sorry, I'm sorry, looking for an answer.
So what we could say is that Councillor Hoy could get a written update on where we're at with that.
Yeah, I'm quite happy.
I'm
Quite happy to go to Marcus and ask for an update in relation to actually when the strategy was actually produced, the date, and whether that's in place prior to making decisions around purchase of additional fleet vehicles.
Yeah, and could I be providing the audit committee perhaps with a copy of the strategy? Thank you.
Yes, I think they can do that for us. Thank you. Thank you for raising that. Members haven't got any other questions. We have an officer tonight, Nicola. Oh, Nicola Mann. Oh, yeah, I've seen you in loads of emails. Who's going to give you an update on the, to give some reassurance on the update of the audit on overtime and expenses. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Make sure I'm close enough. So yeah, just to give members an update, the overtime and expenses audit was a fairly new one that obviously has just been put in the report. So you'll see the progress bar is 0% for that because that's only just been finalised. So again, just to give members reassurance that in terms of the recommendations, we welcomed the report and are already working on the recommendations and making sure that there's the policies updated and using our payroll system to ensure that such things like CO2 and picking the right kind of mileage claim is obviously going forward a way in which we can use the system to do that. So just to kind of reassure members that that's all in hand, and we will be working towards the deadline of end of October.
Thank you, Nicola. Now, the item 8 was for noting. Is the report noted, members? Right, thank you. Mr. Porter, you're welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting. Otherwise, you're more than welcome if you wish to excuse yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, now moving on. Item 9 is the Treasury Management Annual Review 2023-24. We now consider the report of the Interim Director Resources setting out a summary of the Council's Treasury Management activity for the 2023-24 financial year. Mr. Willis, have you got anything to add to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As you've said, the report sets out the Council's Treasury Management activities for last year, 23-24. The report describes the investments during the year and the income generated from those investments. Income significantly exceeded the budget as a result of the amount of cash held and the level of interest rates. Our Treasury Advisors, Link, also carried out a review of the Council's capital financing requirement after the end of the financial year, which is described in the next report on this agenda, but the findings are reflected in the closing capital financing requirement in this report. You'll see that the report is for recommending onwards to Council, because Council will need to approve the annual Treasury Management report, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Any questions, members? Councillor O'Leary.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question with regards to the breakdown of investments on page 9.4. I recognise most of those counterparts that we've placed money with, but I don't recognise Prime. Can you tell me what that means, please?
Sorry, yes, Carrie can answer the question. Thank you.
Hi. So with regard to the money market funds, Link, our Treasury Advisors, operates and they advise us in terms of the best money markets to invest with. So the ones that we show here are kind of the top performing and are recommended to us directly by Link, and that is why we invest with them. In terms of who they are, it's a recommended firm or a recommended money market fund from Link.
Sorry if I can come back on that, please, Chair. Like I said, I recognise most of the counterparts that we know HSBC, we know Deutsche. I struggled to find out what Prime actually meant. I think it'd be quite interesting to know who we're lending our money to. I get it that we're doing it via an advisor, but does that Prime mean via a Prime broker, or is this, or is there actually a company called Prime that we're placing money with? This is what I'm not very clear on.
Yes, Carrie, can you answer for that?
So sorry, yes, I suppose as well, just to kind of that money market funds. So when we see Deutsche and HSBC, they're not bank accounts. It's kind of an investment fund. So I'll take that away because I don't honestly know the answer straight off, and I will come back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Members. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hoy, I nearly forgot about you, sorry.
Yes, you need to remember me every time. It's hopefully a fairly easy question. And it's probably for Mr. Willis to answer, but we have a fairly cautious Treasury management policy. In the past, we've spoken about being a bit more adventurous. I can understand the risks of being more adventurous, but would there be anything that could stop us being more adventurous within the rules and regulations that currently govern local government investments?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ho will know that our priorities regarding investments, regarding security and liquidity, and then a distant third, yield. So that means we only put money where we know it's most likely to be safe, which is very safe. But we don't want to invest the money for too long so that we haven't got the cash and we end up going overdrawn on our bank account. So that's liquidity. And after we've satisfied those two requirements, only then would we consider yield, and we'd look at the best rate that we can get, bearing it in mind. So certain graded investments, we wouldn't go below that, even if the interest that we could earn could be higher. So that means that we're tied in quite strictly to what's the range of counterparties that we can invest in. What I would say is perhaps this is answering a different question, but we may not be able to get more adventurous, and I don't think we could under current treasury management strategy, or should, but we could get more ethical. And we've been looking and talking to Link recently about maybe as part of our 25-26 treasury management strategy, specifically targeting ethical funds. Sometimes they're ethical funds that you've got certain assurances that there's no way they'll be invested in certain things and they'll only be invested in certain other things. And the attraction of them is they are paying very comparable rates to non-ethical funds like for like. And there are funds available for local authorities now as well. And they've got a little bit of a track record that show they're matching the non-ethical funds. So we're specifically looking to build that into our next treasury management strategy to give us that flexibility to be able to invest in those funds. It's not answering the question about being more adventurous, but it is answering a question where perhaps if you've got to balance the financial return against social value, there's something a little bit more on the social value side.
Thank you. Could I just say that's an answer to a question I really wished I'd asked.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. If there aren't any other questions, then I will now move a motion that recommendation 1 as set out in page 9.1 of the report to be approved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hoy, thank you. Right. Now, members.
People happy with that, yeah?
Yeah, I'm going around to now, members, you have up to 5 minutes to speak on this if you wish. Or we can move on to vote on recommendation 1 as set out on page 9.1 of the report. So we can move on to recommend the contents of this report to the full council. Please show by a show of hands those for. It looks as if it's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. So that recommendation is carried. Right, we can now move on to item 10, which is a Treasury Management Q1 update. We'll now consider the report of the Interim Director Resources providing an update of the Council's Treasury Management activity for the period 1st of April 24 to the 30th of June 2024, in accordance with the Council's Treasury Management Policy and good practice in Treasury Management. Mr. Willis, do you have anything to add to the report?
Thank you, Chair. This report provides a progress update on the current year's Treasury Management activities. Investment returns have continued to exceed budget so far. It is possible, if the capital programme is not delivered as quickly as planned, this will continue to result in high levels of cash being held. If interest rates are slow to reduce, then it's likely that investment income will again exceed expectations for the year. Following a review by Link, the Council's capital finance requirement is now correctly accounted for. This was reported in detail at the last committee meeting. There is no external borrowing by this council. The capital financing requirement relates to accounting adjustments to regularise some very old errors. It does now require the council to set aside £15,000 that is charged in the accounts each year. I'm happy to answer any questions on the report. Thank you, Chair.
Members, have any of you got any questions about this report? Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Chair. Page 10.3, with regards to approved limits, it mentions there's a limit breach. I was slightly, to me, it's slightly unclear how the breach was limited, how the breach was broken, how the limit was breached. Sorry, I'll get my words right in the end. Can someone explain to me what happened, please?
Chair, whilst my colleague is finding the answer to your question, what I would say is this happens sometimes. Quite often it's when there's an unexpected payment into an account that just pushes us over the limit and it exceeds the limit that we've set ourselves, and it's only our own limits that we set to hold in any one account, and we've gone over it, and then we have to report that. I think Carrie's going to be able to explain the specific circumstances of this particular breach.
So in terms of the cash flow and how this works is we run the cash flow first thing in the morning. So we download the bank statements, we look at all our bank investments, and then we make decisions on what we need to invest. In this situation, for some reason, the funds didn't come into the bank until later that day. And therefore, our bank balance closed over the 5 million. We don't recheck during the day. We have sort of many other daily tasks. And so cash flow becomes something we do at the start of the day. It rarely, rarely happens. I can't think of a time when this has ever happened before, when the money's come into our bank after the morning check. So it was purely a timing issue.
So sorry, just to follow up, please, Chair. So that was basically, we were left with a long position that we didn't do anything with. Is that what we're saying?
Yes. So at the start, so we anticipate keeping £5 million in our bank account. That's our maximum limit. As Tim says, that's purely our only internal sort of set thing. It doesn't cause any issues with that. It's just trying to limit risk. And in the morning, we had below 5 million. No action was required. But during the day, we received a large sum of money and therefore we breached.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? This report, if we're moving on, is to be noted. Is it noted? Noted. Report is noted. Thank you. Moving on to item 11, the review of internal audit services. We now consider the report of the Interim Director Resources setting out the plan and timetable for the internal audit services. Mr. Willis, have you anything to add to the report?
Thank you, Chair. As part of the partnership with Brentwood, the provision of internal audit services are being reviewed. The plan is to test whether or not we can achieve better outcomes from the service by procuring a single provider for both councils. The aim is to achieve the benefits outlined in the report and deliver a new audit service from the 1st of April 2025. This report sets out the plan to achieve this. A further report will be brought to the committee once the outcome is known. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, members? Well, this report is also for noting. Is this report noted? Thank you very much. Okay. Now, moving on to item 12, which is the establishment of a standards subcommittee. We'll now consider a report of the monitoring officer seeking to appoint 3 members of the Audit and Governance Committee to serve on the standards subcommittee in accordance with the committee's terms of reference. Mr. Birkinshaw, do you have anything to add to the report?
Nothing particularly, Chairman. Hopefully the report's clear and you provided a summary for me, so that's very kind. Just to note, primarily bringing this forward to you now, as well as the need to establish a subcommittee, we are required to appoint new independent persons. Has been out to advert and we received 6 applications, so there will be an immediate task for the subcommittee to meet all those applicants and make recommendations to full council to appoint independent persons. As I've referenced in the report, I would recommend, and I will be discussing with the standards subcommittee, increasing the number of independent persons from 1 to 2, just to provide cover as needed and ensure that if there's a number of complaints, that load is spread and we have a different perspective on matters. I think that's helpful. a minimal financial implication as is set out in the report in terms of meeting that allowance. And I just asked the subcommittee if there are any comments on that proposal, but hopefully it's one that members can comfortably support in terms of that proposed increase. So an immediate task, but the role is set out in the report, Chairman.
Right, Councillor Wooten and then Councillor Marriott. Thank you.
Chairman, thank you for this. The section on page 12.3, 2.3, refers to the standards process also encompassing members of parish councils who are subject to the same scrutiny and standards that those in the district council are subject to. My question, it's just one of it just seems right to incorporate or request that we also co-opt someone onto the committee as a representative from the parish councils across Rochford, given the fact that Rochford is so heavily parished, and the fact that there is a body, the Rochford Association of Local Councils. It just seems equitable and fair to ask for representation on the committee, as well as, and I know we haven't voted on it, 2 independent members and as well as 3. So, you know, I would like to see us adopt a member from the parish councils in Rochford.
Mr. Berkinshaw.
Yeah, Councillor Mrs Wilson will vouch. This is an issue that has been raised by the Constitution Working Group, who met recently. I think it was indeed Councillor Wilson that raised it around a need for parish representation within the council standards arrangements. There is no current provision within there, so they have asked me to come back on that matter, and there is a further meeting of the working group on Monday, and therefore I think the working group are looking forward to bring formal recommendations to council in order to provide for that. And I do agree that there is merit in it, and it's something that's not unique. It happens in many areas. I suppose the challenge that you're presenting is, can we involve them, and how do we involve them in this subcommittee that actually needs to move and meet quite quickly? I think there is merit in that. I think on the other hand, I think it may, Chairman, cause some delay and more difficulty and unintended consequences in trying to move this on, because we do need to appoint independent persons. So I think view to this committee would be, yes, it's real value. It has been brought forward by the Constitution Working Group, but I suppose thinking out loud, I would be reluctant to try involve somebody within the standard subcommittee now, unless there is a reasonable and quick way in which we might be able to do that. And members will obviously know the parish sector and how that's composed and represented better perhaps than myself as a fairly new officer.
You wish to come back, Mr. Councillor Wood?
Thank you, Chairman. Look, I don't believe, whilst I acknowledge that latter point, I don't think that becomes a reason not to do it. And it's interesting that obviously it's being debated within the Constitution Working Group. I'm not quite sure of our role here, but I would like to see us recommend from this committee that there is a parish representative. How that is achieved, through what governance process, I don't know. But I don't believe the fact that you can't get someone quick enough to be part of the urgent task that has got to be conducted. I don't think that becomes a reason. I acknowledge it's a point, but I don't think it should get in the way of it happening, subject to what other members on the committee feel.
Can I just make one comment, Chairman? I mean, there is an option to bring in formally, but the only provision in which that person would have a formal role on the subcommittee would be obviously through amendments of the Constitution. Which may be a little difficult, but I'm happy to take that on board and invite comments of other members, which will be interesting, and try to achieve that. That'll be interesting in others' views.
Thank you. Councillor Marriott.
Chairman, much of what I wished to say has already been covered by my colleague, Councillor Wotton here. What I will say is, historically, the parish representative was put forward by the Rochford 100 Association of Local Councils. So a device does exist to do that, and they next meet in next month, usually the third Thursday of the month. So it could be agreed that obviously subject to amendment of the when the Constitution is amended, that the appointing of a parish representation, or indeed from the town council perhaps, is done via the Rochford 100 Association has been done historically, because there's no point to reinvent the wheel. It's already there in place, because that's what we've done. Doesn't necessarily mean you do it precisely as in the past, but look at that, and that I think is a good place to start when the Constitution Working Group looks at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. Thank you. So the process will be that the Constitution Group has to pass this change, and then we can move on. Because I haven't got any objections to it personally. It's all part of being transparent. What's your view? Sorry.
There's no, I think, Chairman, just to be clear, there's no objection to it, and there is a mechanism. The issue I raise is there is no provision for a formal role on the subcommittee. So I could get a parish representative to come and sit on the panel to meet these people, but until it goes formally through council and there is provision made within the membership and composition of the subcommittee, it's not possible, and therefore there's a point around. And I would like to move this on expediently so that the council can appoint members, independent persons, quickly, because the term of offices have run past the due date which was there. So it is an issue we immediately need to address. The question I would put to members is it essential that an independent parish representative is on the standard subcommittee to meet with a fairly brief meeting with independent persons? If it's the wish, I will look to achieve that, but I would prefer to move forward with the meeting of the applicants, get that recommended, and work with the Constitution Working Group to make provision in the arrangements going forward. But
Chairman, can I propose that we crack on as intended, and then when the Constitution and everything has had a chance to do what that needs to do, then we can look at bringing that person, if that's what's decided can happen, bring that person on board at a later date. Surely there's nothing to say that we can't go ahead with what we plan to do, and then once the Constitution has been altered and agreed by full council, okay, that may even take until the next council year. Maybe that would be a good place to start, but at least it's in the works, as it were. So maybe for this council year that we do as planned, and then once the next council year we start the parish representation from May next year.
Thank you. I believe that is achievable. And thank you very much, Councillor Merritt. Yes. Councillor Booth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, from what I'm hearing from Councillor Watson, I don't know if that's a formal recommendation that was going to be formulated, but I think in many ways there seems a desire from members here that we recognise and value and build a partnership out of transparency with our parish councils that do such effective work across our district. I certainly would be in support of making sure they are included, but with the caveat that I don't think it should delay the process that's been outlined to us today. And I hope in some way we can have a recommendation that would seek to have the parishes included within a reasonable timescale in a sensible way. Thank you.
Thank you. So we could say that this committee seeks, once the issues of governance have been sorted out, constitution have been sorted out, to action the inclusion of a parish representative on the council, something like that. Yeah.
I think always earnestly seeking gives extra clarification to that, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
We can actually do that. Can we do that at a later date? Someone can bring that motion at a later date. And in the meanwhile, of course, the Rochford 100 can sort somebody out as well, because be ready to go kind of thing.
I think, Chairman, I welcome the comments and support the members. I equally would support parish representation. The desire of the Constitution Working Group is to report to your next meeting of this committee, and I'm hoping, therefore, to include a recommendation in there about how we have parish representation on the standards arrangements going forward. So I think in terms of today, that endorsement of members can be recorded in the minutes, and we'll bring that forward next time for you to consider and then recommend to council. Fairly straightforward.
Councillor Wootton, are you happy with that?
Yes, I think, I mean, it depends whether we want to make a formal recommendation from this meeting or accept the monitoring officer will include it, and quite happy. I thought Councillor Booth said it very.
The monitoring officer said it's happening already. So
good, good.
Thank you. We'll go through. Thank you. Was it Councillor Hoy? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't really think I need to say much now. In my opinion, it's a matter for the Constitutional Working Group to do. I would have concerns that, don't forget, if it's going to be a subcommittee of 3 members, there'll be 2 groups excluded from that if one of those members is a parish councillor. So I think that needs to be taken into account. I'm sure that'll be taken back to the Constitutional Working Group as well. But yeah, I'm happy that'll be minuted, that what you said, so I'm sure that's good enough for all of us.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Councillor Booth, you got another point? No, you haven't.
Just to bring forth a helpful debate, Chairman, I thank members for the comments, which I'll obviously reflect back into the Constitution Working Group, as will Councillor Wilson, no doubt, who is serving on that. Yeah, the report does reference around the composition of the subcommittee, which is 3 members of the subcommittee, 3 members of this committee to be cross-party. That's therefore 1 member from 3 groups and 1 not to be represented. The chairman helpfully took that on board, and I think has canvassed members' views. I think the proposal, Chairman, is that Councillor Milne will be a member, representing the Liberal Democrat group, and will chair the subcommittee as the chair of the parent committee. Councillor Stuart Wilson will occupy a seat, and Councillor Marriott will occupy a seat as well. I think that's the proposal, Chairman, that came forward during some informal correspondence, and therefore I think that's been put to members this evening, that those members be appointed and Councillor Milne be appointed chairman of that subcommittee to initially conduct them interviews. If members are supportive and can formally agree to that, then that will be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Birkinshaw. Members, if there's no more questions, we'll now vote on the recommendations. Recommendation 1, that the Audit and Governance Committee appoints 3 of its members to serve on the Standards Subcommittee in accordance with the committee's terms of reference, and appoints a chair and vice chair of the subcommittee. So it's a vote on a show of hands for the recommendation. Those in favour? That appears to be unanimous. There being no one against, so that is carried. And we look forward to swiftly moving on and interviewing our independent persons. Have we got any already lined up?
We've had 6 applications, which is quite good. So getting them updated, and that we will be meeting with them in the near future. So hopefully, Chairman, we can bring a report back swiftly to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Birkinshaw. I was just looking at our independent person, Janine, tonight, and she's shaking her head, so she hasn't got any points to make, but you're most welcome. That's about it, isn't it? The second recommendation, yeah. The committee notes the current position and next steps in connection with the appointed of independent persons as part of the council's standards arrangements, as set out in the report, and endorses the proposal that 2 independent persons be appointed. Members, is this noted? Noted. That is noted. Well, that concludes the business for the evening. Thank you for your attendance, and you've been really good actually in raising a lot of points tonight, and it's all inside the time frame, which is unusual for me to actually be chairing something that's on time. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the officers, and thank you very much.